Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Oh,
We'll get them back up.
oh, okay, that's not power going out again. As you can see, we're having a power issue today. I guess it's campus-wide. At the University Church, you couldn't hear the sermon, or you could, or I can't. Yeah. So I'm hoping that the hospital's got its power. All right, so anyway, I want to welcome you to the Roy Branson Sabbath School class. If you can't, you might want to move down. So anyway, I want to welcome you to Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School. We're continuing our series on making the whole person whole, a collection of papers from Jack Provonsha, edited by David Larson. I really like this book, David, Making the Whole Person Whole. It gives very practical aspects of some of these issues that we think are abstract, but they're really not. They have a very practical application to them. So anyway, today we are delighted to have one of our regular questioners and participants in the Sabbath School, Petre Cimpoeur, and I asked him what Cimpoeur means, and I think you said you pay the piper.
Just piper.
Huh?
Piper. Piper.
What?
Just piper.
Just piper.
Oh, piper. Oh, just piper. Oh, I see. Okay, there. That's a little different. I mean, that's the one you smoke, or is it pipe?
No.
The
No.
instrument.
No, the
The musical instrument.
yeah, the Scottish, I think.
Yeah, okay, all right. Peter, you were born in Romania, and you grew up there, and I know we've heard some of your stories about, now were you always an Adventist?
I was born from an Adventist family.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they don't have Adventist schools there, so you went to the public schools, correct? And I
Yes.
think because you missed on Saturdays, you had to pay a price. What, on Monday, or
On Monday.
did you get a physical?
Monday was the holiday.
So in other words, was that just a weekly thing for you?
Yes, almost weekly.
Okay.
From the first 4 grades.
4 grades, okay. And then what did you do after the 4 grades? Did you?
Well, that was not mandatory since the 5th grade, and I have to go to school in Sabbath.
Okay. And where did you meet Lydia?
Romania.
In Romania. Okay. And
In the church.
in the church. So you were on a regular basis at church.
Yes.
And she just caught your eye, and you just said,
Lighten my life.
and we appreciate Lydia as well. Now you have one daughter, I think?
Yes.
One daughter, and she lives in Southern California somewhere, right?
Yes, in Corona del Mar.
Corona del Mar. Well, nice place. And you came to America
Directly in California.
in
In Loma.
1990? 1980. Okay. And you studied, you continued your education with the Cal State system?
Yes, I did almost entirely my master in history at Cal State University in San Bernardino. And then I followed with a second master in national security of the United States. And then the third master at San Jose State University. And I got my PhD in international studies from Princeton.
Okay, that's great. And I know that if I have an historical question, I can either look it up in the Encyclopedia Britannica or ask Peter. We don't have microphones today, but sorry. But we have a reserved seat for you right now. We're hoping these lights come on. And so, and had you taught here as well?
Yes, I taught at La Sierra for several years in the history department, and also at Cal State University in San Bernardino, where I taught American military history.
American military history,
Yes.
that's interesting.
And at Crafton in New Caipa, I taught moral history
Okay.
and history of Western civilization.
Okay. And I know you like to fish, but do you have other hobbies?
Well, I like sports.
Okay,
I'm playing tennis
okay,
every week 3 times.
okay, all right. All right, so,
I'm an avid reader.
well, anyway, I'm not going to take any more of your time, but Peter's going to talk on the chapter dealing with faith and reason, the scientific method. And so at this time, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and it's all yours. You might have to talk a little louder because we don't have microphone, but
I will try.
okay.
Thank you, Forrest, for bringing first the blinds down, creating an atmosphere like in a Gothic cathedral that inspires hope. Until a few moments ago, I was ready to declare myself the man that is bringing the rain, because I remember my last presentation also was raining. And of course the rain is supposed to bring prosperity and also a renewal. But first of all, I want to thank you all for, despite this weather, for coming and being present here. Well, in regard to the subjects of today, of course, first of all, before we start, if the scientific method is appropriate for religion and for religious knowledge, we have to define what the scientific method is. Well, the scientific method, of course, it's a method. It's an experimental method, and includes a few steps, and I will mention a few of these steps. It starts with observation, and then collecting data, then formulating a hypothesis, and finally the experiment. The scientific method was discovered by a French mathematician and philosopher, René Descartes. René Descartes is the one that came up with the famous saying, cogito ergo sum. That means I'm thinking, therefore I exist. Of course, he was a Roman Catholic, and it was expected from him to come up with a different conclusion, like cogito ergo Deo, which means I think, therefore God exists. But he didn't reach that conclusion. The 17th century, when he developed this method, was a time of rationalism. It was a time when the reason was put on a high pedestal, and it was believed that reason is able to answer all our questions. Also, man, instead of God, was put in the center and was made the measure of all things. Also, in the 17th century, an interesting phenomenon happened. Science and philosophy departed from theology. It's a phenomenon that it cannot be explained. But nonetheless, it happened in the 17th century. Of course, when the scientific method was applied to the nature, it was highly successful. But when it was tried to be applied to the religious knowledge, it was not successful. It was an échec. And not only that was generally an échec, but also undermined the belief in the Bible as the inspired word of God, and also even in God as the creator, sustainer, and the one that is holding in his hands the destiny of man. As we know, Christianity appeared in the small province of the periphery of the Roman Empire in Palestine, but it didn't remain there. From Palestine, it spread to the Hellenistic world, and it didn't remain immune to it. It was influenced by Hellenism. Philosophical ideas like Platonism, Gnosticism, Manichaeism influenced Christianity, penetrated Christianity. From the first century, even the fathers of the church, they agreed with this dualistic idea that this philosophic idea has brought into Christianity, the idea of dualism. In other words, the reality that is surrounding us, it's formed from two different categories. That is matter and the spirit. Of course, matter was considered that it's transient, it's changing, it's not eternal. But the spirit was considered that it's not changing and it's immortal. Among these philosophers, the most influential for Christianity was Plato. Plato believed that in regard to human beings, they are also part of these intercomponents, these two categories, which is the body that represents the matter and the soul. Plato believed that after people died, their soul, which it's a it's a separate category, is going to its eternal place or celestial place in heaven. Platonism and Neoplatonists believe that basically some statements in the Bible, like Christ after the resurrection went to sit at the right hand of the Father, for them didn't make any sense, or they believe that they are simply metaphors, because they argue a spirit doesn't have right or left hand or right or left sides. Among the most influential theologians after the Apostle Paul was Augustine. Augustine, he adopted the religion of his mother and became the bishop of Hippo in North Africa. He was able to represent God as non-material, in non-material and non-temporal terms. Of course, this gave birth to the doctrine of the immortality of the soul that is existent until these days in Christianity. And also, it was the base of the conflict between science and religion. It also created a big divide between natural and supernatural worlds. Well, about this doctrine of immortality of the soul, we were witnessing just recently when Billy Graham died and his father was talking about, his son was talking about his father, that he's in heaven now. And also when President Bush is giving eulogy of his father, he was talking, thanking him that he's in heaven now, holding hands with his mother and his sister. As we see, it was a doctrine that penetrated Christianity. It's a wrong doctrine, and it's in existence until this day. But let's examine what the Bible says about this dualism. The Bible declares clearly, Israel, hear, O Israel, your Lord is one. He is the creator. Everything that exists was created by him. He is the sustainer of his creation. He is good. His creation is good. And in him, all is united. It's a unity. Also, Dr. Provonsha is critical about Manichaeism, that it was a religious current, religious heresy, that believed that evil is a person. Dr. Provonsha affirmed clearly that evil is not a person, it's just the absence of good. And also in regard to pantheism, he declared that this is partially true, partially false. The partially false part is that pantheists believe that God is everything that he created, is part of his creation, is not a separate entity, a personal God. But they were right in the way that they believe in the omnipresence of God. In other words, God is present everywhere. Well, in light of all these ideas, the question is the scientific methods applicable to religion? And Dr. Provonsha answered clearly, yes, it is applicable to religion. And he argued that there are things in common between religion and science. There are also differences between religion and science. And those common, he mentioned two of them. And he said that the first one is the spirit or the dedication of both religion and science to the search for truth, the quest, in other words. And the other common element is the experience. Both of them are experiencer, use experience for knowledge. Also, he argued that there are some things that are different. And he mentioned the repeatability and also the scope of the scientific method. Well, let's take each one of these and look a little bit at each one. In regard to the spirit and the dedication of religion, of the science and religion, he was using some quotations from a few authors. I will mention two of them, which is Waldo Gerard, a neurophysiologist, and also Ellen White. In regard to Gerard, Dr. Provonsha was quoting from the book Comments on Religion in an Age of Science. And he made a few interesting comments about this common element, search for the truth between the religion and science. He said that basically both of them are practicing their search for the truth with an open mind and also with the courage to pursue the truth all the way wherever it's leading it. But also he affirmed that both religion and science, scientists and theologians, they are using in their search for truth some preconceived ideas and also some biases. And that should not be so. To support this point of view, Gerard is telling a short story. A patient went to see a shrink, whatever, psychologist, psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist noticed that this patient is continuously snapping his fingers. And he asked him, why do you do that? And the patient answered, because I'm afraid of the elephants and I try to keep them away from me. The psychiatrist tried to calm him down and told him, well, you should not be afraid of the elephants because they are very far from here. And immediately the patient answered, well, certainly that is efficient, isn't it? Well, another observation that Gerard made was that religion and science, the theologian and the scientist were not both treated equally. While the scientist was given free hand when he recognized that he doesn't know something, or he didn't know what the other people knew or knew them differently, for the religion it was not the same treatment. Because all the time religion was criticized for the past, for the Crusades, for the Inquisition, for the wars of religion, and for the crimes that were committed in the name of religion. But Gerard used a few memorable words to demonstrate that we should look forward, not always to the bad things, but also to look at the positive things. And he used an aphorism that says we should bring on the altar of the past, we should bring fire, not in the ashes. Which few words which I like very much. Also, he used the quotation from Ellen White to support the first point of the common first point. And he took quotation from the book Ellen White wrote on counsels on, counsel to the writers and the editors. And Ellen White made a few interesting points in regard to this. She affirmed that the fact that in our communities or churches there is not too much agitation about the doctrines, that is not a proof that we settle in the truth about these doctrines. It could be a proof that basically in the church or the people cannot make distinction between truth and error anymore. She also argued that the age of a doctrine is not a proof that it's settled in the truth. Ellen White also argued that we should not be afraid to submit our doctrines to a close scrutiny. And she is kind of critical to those that do not practice their religion with an open mind. But they settle into something that once they learn, and then they just stop there. And they, of course, in this way, they will not be able to increase their knowledge about God and their experience with God. The second common point that Dr. Provonsha is mentioning in this chapter is the experience. He argued that both the science, it's experimental. The science uses experiment for validating the facts or the truth, but not only the science, the religion also is experimental. And Dr. Provonsha is mentioning 1 Corinthians 15, when Apostle Paul declared that Christ after resurrection was seen by more than 500 people. They handled Jesus. They were able to talk to him, to touch him, to eat with him, and that was an experience of a resurrected Christ, and they were able to spend this time for 40 days after his resurrection. But there are also things that are not common to religion and science. And as I mentioned, the first one will be repeatability. The way the scientific method is practiced today by the scientists doesn't include the things that were experienced one time only, like the one I just mentioned. Seeing Christ, touching him, talking with him, and so forth, experiencing him, in other words. And in this way, the science is imposing restriction on itself, because we know that, as I mentioned, God created everything. This is what the Bible tells, and the ultimate reality should be traced to him. Then the scientific methods cannot exclude a part of the reality that God created and limit itself only to the natural reality. Also, Dr. Provonsha mentioned that the scientific method is excluding the creative person from its research. And through this, he understood the person that it's acting upon, and also it excludes the relationship between persons. And this relationship between persons is very complex. And also it excluded the relationship between man and God, which is basically what the religion is about. And the Bible, from the beginning to the end, it's telling us, taste and see that Lord is good. It's an experimental thing. And as I mentioned, what Apostle Paul mentioned about 1 Corinthians 15, about Jesus, also Bible is telling us come and reason together. Then experience and the fact that the science, as is practicing the scientific method, excludes things that happened once or experienced once, is limiting, it's imposing limits on itself, which is wrong. And Dr. Provonsha asked again the question, well, in light of all these things, should we still consider the scientific method applicable to the religious knowledge? And he's answering again, yes. But to be complete, the scientific method should include the whole reality, not only the natural world, also to include things that were experimented once, and also things that were relationship between persons and between people and God. Well, in relation with the experience between people and God, it's interesting to notice also that to know God means more than we know facts about Him. Actually, knowing Him intimately, and having a personal, an intimate relationship with Him. And that includes several things, like faith and trust, and all this together with our senses and with the reason. Then again, Dr. Provonsha answered that to be complete and to be at their best, both science and religion should include all this in the scientific research. And Dr. Provonsha is closing this chapter. It's a small chapter with the statement that nature and revelation speak with one voice. Now, in closing, I'd like to make a few personal remarks about this chapter, about Christianity, about science, and about religion. We can say that Christianity brought together the love for God from the Jews and put it together with the love for nature and reason from the Greeks. Also, Christianity took its art, science, and philosophy from the Greeks and religion from the Hebrews. The science is about the natural law. The religion is about the moral law. The science is about things. Religion is about people and their free choices. The science is taking the things apart to learn how they work, and the religion is putting them together to understand what they mean. And the last one will be that science is using the left part of the brain, and religion is using the right part of the brain, and they speak different languages. Thank you for your attention. And before we start our discussions, I'd like to make a few suggestions. We can talk about the influences, Greco-Roman influences in Christianity. We can say a lot of things about this. We can talk also about our personal relationship with God. Excuse me. What that means. I assume that we have here not only people that were born in an Adventist family, but which became Adventists in their later life. And what meant for them this personal experience with God. And if we have more time, I'll suggest that we can talk at least for a few minutes to finish our discussion that we started last time with Forrest, when John Sabbath made a suggestion that I agree with, that in talking about what Christians' reaction should be when they face with
Violence?
violence, yes, conflict, including in our discussion not only the Torah, not only the Old Testament, lex talionis that is telling us eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and so forth and so on, but also include the New Testament, especially the Sermon on the Mount. And of course, I'm open for discussion, anything else that you want to bring up.
Thank you. That was a very clear presentation. The idea that science can't investigate something which only occurred once is not strictly accurate. So the Big Bang is a single event, but science is able to investigate that by studying things that result from the Big Bang. Sometimes Adventists say that science can't address origins because they weren't there and it's a single event that didn't happen. But likewise, the events that come after are things, if they're repeatable, then that's things that science can investigate. So we need to be careful in saying that science can't investigate things that only happen once.
Yes, I agree with you. This is the point that Dr. Provonsha is making in his in this chapter. But I agree with you. But we can say mainly can use this keyword.
That's certainly true.
Yes.
I believe it was early last year that Pope Francis sent a letter to the bishops cautioning them and warning them and advising them to warn their practitioners, their believers, Catholic believers, against a personal relationship with God. Don't overdo it. You mentioned in invited questions on about a personal relationship with God. What do you think the Pope was really messaging? And why would, at this time, he message his bishops to warn Catholic believers to not overreach and not overthink a personal relationship with God?
Liberal Pope. And he's the one that is accepting liberation theology and had kind of progressive ideas. And even his bishops, not all of them agree with him. Basically, it was discussion in the Vatican that maybe he should be defrocked or whatever, removed from papacy. But, and of course, he is the one that is having close relationship with charismatics now. And but I believe in regard to the personal relationship with God, he can say the same thing. I mean, it cannot be different. Personal relationship with God, I believe, in other words, we can say that somebody that has a close relationship with God is thinking what God is thinking, talking, using the words God is using, and acting in the way God is acting. That will be a short definition of what it means to have a close relationship with God. Apostle Paul is describing that wonderfully when he said, I was crucified with Christ, but I don't live anymore, but Christ lives in me. In other words, everything, all our thoughts and actions and whatever we do, we should ask ourselves, is this what Christ will approve for us to do in our life and to think about and to act? This is what I believe. The Pope, I didn't read that, but this is what I believe it could mean.
Very good.
Yes.
I have a question, and it's in a couple of statements. I missed it when you said in the 17th century there was a divergence, the scientific method was sort of developed. And you gave credit to, who did you give credit to?
René Descartes. But also like Newton, Isaac Newton,
Right.
was practicing that method and encouraging, supporting it.
I'm sorry, I missed that name.
Isaac Newton.
No, the one before that.
René Descartes.
Okay.
A French philosopher and mathematician.
Right, mistook what you said, so I just wanted to be sure.
Okay.
You know, whenever I think about the origins of science, I always go back to Aristotle, because Aristotle began to tell people they should observe and do some of that. So in my own mind, the genesis of maybe at least Western thinking might have begun with him. Anyway, I think that's not important. The point I wanted to make that's, I think, worth people who are who don't do the kind of research I used to do, is that we consider there are two types of studies that one did in medicine. There were discovery studies, and then there were final definitive studies. And in the definitive studies, you do a whole bunch of whatever you're going to do, and you power it up, and you make sure that you come out with a P factor or whatever you want to do. And to me, that's considered to be science, at least in medicine. But something that people ignore is that there's something called discovery studies, in which you bring together a number of cases that seem to be similar, and you try to make a point out of those things. And to me, those studies are just as important as the second types of study. They're observational studies based upon a number of cases that you bring together, and then you try to make a conclusion out of that. And it seems to me that early in my life, when I began to think about science and religion and these kind of things that we're talking about today, it dawned on me that maybe the Bible, with all of its stories, are really, if you want to think about discovery studies, are perfect examples of where you can bring together a number of different stories together that make the same point, and then you can try to make you can come to some sort of conclusion about that you can test as you read other people, or as you talk about these in other experiences. You can begin to expand your basis for your initial impression or your initial thing. So I think that we almost always, when we talk about science and medicine, we refer to the second part of the kinds of studies, and we rarely refer to the more discovery kinds of studies. But you would never have the second kind of studies if you didn't have the first kind of studies. And so they're partnerships that occur, and I think so often we don't look at the relationship between A and B types of studies. And so I think it's quite scientific, for me at least, to look at the Bible, try to put together different stories, different parts of the Bible, see whether I can come up with some sort of hypothesis that I can carry throughout as I read the rest of the Bible. So I think there are different flavors or different stages in science, at least in medicine, and I think sometimes we let the opposition get too free rein and define what they say science is, instead of having a more comprehensive view.
Well, thank you very much. I was expecting to have more discussion about scientific method, because I know that we have here people that are practicing research, are doing research and practicing this method. In regard to Aristotle, I should add that during Middle Ages, basically Aristotle in the medieval universities that started basically in the 12th century, were talking more about Aristotle than they were talking about Christ. Then this is a major influence of Aristotle in Christianity. Yes?
Well, let me ask a question. Scientific method, but you're a historian. How do those two overlap? Because history events are just one time. So there must be some scientific method to develop a historical theme. Am I correct?
Well, I believe this is what Dr. Provonsha is saying through the fact that the way the scientific method is applied now is not right, because it doesn't include things that happen just once and were experienced once. It should include that too in the research.
This is more a question, and I'm putting it out to the class. so that either in private or in public, you can tell me I'm wrong. So I put this out there because it's an argument I'm going to use in my attempt to write another book, should I last to write the next book. And it's going to be quasi.
I hope you will.
Okay, we've talked about it a little bit. It's a quasi-history book, but in the background, I'm going to make this argument and say that I'm using the scientific method to look at history, and this is going to be my argument. I'm going to have a hypothesis, and the more the more the hypothesis can be carried throughout the historical narrative that I'm going to talk about, the more likely it is to be true. The more exceptions that a person can find to the hypothesis that I follow through history, the more likely my hypothesis is wrong. And it seems to me that's a way to use, quotes, the scientific way of looking at data and facts in a reasonable way as applied to history. And so it is an argument that I'm going to use, and I would love to have people poke holes into that argument.
And I should add that, what do you think about the scientists and the theologian bringing both in their research their own ideas and biases?
I think the problem is that there are too many exceptions to people's hypothesis as they go in either direction. Mm-hmm. And so the exceptions disprove the rule.
Thank you, Peter. Always stimulating. Just a couple of thoughts, and those of us who have one foot in both of those fields, this is always good to talk about. Just as a start, just a couple of points. I don't see science as the opposite of or in an antagonist to religion. I think good science is God speaking. The reason I like to chase numbers and a scientific method when I'm doing things is that it's a reliable, consistent, verifiable. No one's saying the scientific method will come up with ultimate truth, but it's a way of chasing ideas and confirming or falsifying them and moving on. And it's a way that we can change our mind systematically and in an orderly way. I don't always find that necessarily through a religious approach. A religious approach is more often about, I think, power, and you can't think that and you can't disprove it, therefore you must believe it, and if you don't come up with the conclusion I've got, then somehow you're outside of God. So that's one of the reasons why I like science. Just the other point I would make is that the thing about religious experience, everything that we call a religious experience is filtered through the human agent, through the human being, and is subject to our previous experiences, our neurotransmitters, our cognitive function, our IQ, whatever personality, whatever words you want to put in there that we've made up to explain how individuals experience life differently. Even religious experience goes through all of those filters. So in that respect, it cannot escape being physical.
Yes.
And I don't find that a problem. That whatever I'm not a neurophysicist, psychologist or whatever, but I understand from my reading that there are parts in the brain that if stimulated, you can have a religious experience. So having said all of that, I don't find the tension as real as, and I don't feel a need to have to justify to the religious side of me that what I've learnt from science needs to be somehow regarded as the enemy. It's just informing who I am.
Well, thank you for bringing more nuances to science and religion. I agree.
Well, firstly, I'd like to say is that the exceptions do not disprove the rule. The fact that they are exceptions demonstrates that there is a rule, usually a general rule. And that's just a throwaway. But the other thing I'd like to say is that religion and relationships are also based on data. You and Lydia have been married 50 years or something like that. Okay, you have a lot of data that your wife loves you. Every morning you get up and she's still there. She makes breakfast, maybe she brings you coffee. I know, it brings coffee. So you don't have to get up and say, I said this once before years ago, you don't have to say, well, this is the 923rd time that Lydia has been here, therefore I know she probably loves me. So I guess that's just my point a little bit, based to follow up on what Graham just said. There is individual variation. You have to account for the observer or the interpreter, or what you mentioned at the beginning, the biases or the point of view that whoever is making the statement has. And you may have a religious experience if you feel that you've had the kind of data with God, let's say, that you have had with the people around you. And I don't know if I'm, if I'm making sense, but
Thank you.
that's what I mean to say.
Yes, I agree.
Oh, no, go.
Graham wants to.
You want to say, we thought you wanted to say something
No, I was just
more.
going to say, we've made up a word called scientific laws. Now, that's our word that we made up for things that are repeatable, consistent, seem to operate the same way most times, although we open our hearts to the fact that sometimes there's exceptions to those. And I know sometimes people accuse me of having, I say that I have a simple faith, that I'm being a little disingenuous about that, but I have. It gives me great faith that God's laws continue to operate consistently. That makes life sensible rather than living in a world that's completely random and chaotic. So when there's a plane up in the air and metal fatigue makes a wing fall off, without being morbid, it doesn't matter whether that plane is full of sinners or saints, it will crash. And that consistency of the way that God's laws work is a greater proof that He is out there than the occasional exception to those laws, which so many people seem to rely on as proof that God exists. I find that nonsensical, to be honest. A rare occasion when the laws seem to misfire, we say, God exists. Whereas you say, no, I think the consistent fact that the laws work. I've got as much chance of getting a cancer bug as anybody. It doesn't matter whether I'm a good person or a bad person. Those laws of nature that God has, whether you like it or not, they operate, are greater proof that we can have a more consistent approach to the way we relate to each other and the world and take in new information and not. The human agency part of looking for that truth is the magic, I think, an important part.
Thank you. I would add that science in itself started from the premise that in the universe there are laws, in the nature there are laws, And starting from this assumption, the science was developed. Because if it was not order and laws, there was nothing to study, basically.
Well, thank you, Peter. I'd like to make several different comments, and I hope I can keep them in order. The first is that thank you very much for an excellent summary. And then the last little bit where you put your own polarities out, I thought was very helpful, and maybe you can write them down and share it with the rest of it. The second point is that I find this topic almost impossible to address because the word religion does not apply to anything actual. There are only specific religions. There is no such thing as the abstraction of religion. Likewise, science is by no means one thing. A Cartesian view of science is quite different from a Francis Bacon view of science. So science itself is pluralistic. So what we have here is asking, does this particular religion work with this particular scientific method? And it gets very, very complex swiftly. Now, third comment. Whatever else we want to say, I think Loma Linda is committed to an integrative view of the whole of existence. There are many people who have given up on that. They say that that's the failed Enlightenment project. One hears that kind of language always, and they're always talking about the failure of the Cartesian tradition. But we wouldn't be sitting in this beautiful room and all of the comforts we have were it not for the Baconian form of science. So I think to be so negative as it has become popular in the humanities about the sciences, plural, is not appropriate for an Adventist campus.
Good point.
I just want to follow up a little bit on what Dave said. Maybe Loma is the corpus callosum of I said maybe Loma Linda can be the corpus callosum of science of religion. And that's another thing I wanted to say. Remember, the right and the left brain do communicate if the brain is intact. And finally, I wanted to say there's a very interesting article in this last issue of Spectrum by Rick Rice that deals with this very topic, and I would recommend it to everybody.
Well, if we consider, and I think you will agree that basically what we understand in general through religion, first of all, we know that the word religion is coming from the Latin relegare, which means a reconnection with God. And I believe this could be applied to all the religions, because all of them wants to connect with what in antiquity was considered mysterium tremendum e fascinans. That means a mystery that it's making us tremble and be fascinated about it. And if we go with this definition, I believe it could be applied to all religions, though they understand this mystery in different ways.
But Buddhism has no God, correct?
Yes, Buddhism doesn't have God.
Buddhism a religion or what?
Well, it's hard to define it. I'm playing tennis with an Indian at Redlands, and I try to stimulate some discussion with him, but he is not very receptive to it.
I'd like to just make another comment about science, at least my version of science. And that is, I think we look at it as a very cold thing where you just sort of collect data and whatever there is. But at least for me, science does have some aspects of religion in that there's mystery to it. There's a lot of mystery to it. And it seems to me that when I first heard about Heisenberg's, theory of uncertainty, it really gave that's one example, but there are many other examples that one can find within the scientific world in which there are situations that will probably never be answered. And this is sort of the mystery, and this gives to me some sense of awe as I look at religion, as I look at science. The same way I feel when I think about God. And so, at least I don't view science as a dispassionate, cold thing that one has to give up all sense of the mysterious, because I think it's there. And so I have a much more maybe soft view of at least my version of science, because I think there are these aspects at least that give me a real sense of awe.
Well, as Dr. Provonsha mentioned in the chapter, religion, what Christian church tried to salvage wherever it was possible, because it was in retreat after this method was formed, was created. It's mentioning that one of the ways in which religion tried to salvage itself, at least part of it, was denying the results of science, which is wrong, of course, because it's certain that we see in reality around us that scientific method brought a lot of technological progress. The society progressed and improved, and the lives of the people improved because of these discoveries.
Anyway, Peter, thank you very, very much. I greatly appreciate it. Give me another applause. Okay, and I'm glad that the power on, the scientific miracle came back on, so we depend on it. So, I guess let's do our benediction. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift you his countenance upon you and give you peace.